This is the Prophecy Project. Understanding the times, the nations in military conflicts, with Bible teacher and author Alan Bonk.
Welcome to session number 22 of the Prophecy Project. Last session, I went through Daniel chapter 2, the feet of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. The 2 feet are seen to exist at the end of the world, at the end of the cosmos, when the God of heaven sets up a kingdom which shall never end. The 2 feet were shown to exist and to represent Daniel 7's 3 beasts and 10 horns, and also Revelation 17's beast from the sea with 4 beasts and 7 heads and 10 horns. I went through the historic sequence of nations and empires from the Romans to today and explained how I feel they match the scriptural description. I also showed how the Ottoman Caliphate or empire was an attempt to change times but was defeated during World War I, making the way open for the lion, England, the bear, and the leopard to sequentially come on the scene, which I believe they have. We now await the 10 toes to manifest and to take dominance away from militant Islam. This manifestation, I believe, is at the door. So now, what are we looking for exactly? We need to make sure that we understand as much as possible about the 10 horns or 10 toes. For example, the horns are called kings in both Revelations and the book of Daniel. But there is a caveat in Revelation chapter 17, verse 12, and it is as follows. Verse 12, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which will receive no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast." Now, the 10 kings are not kings in the true sense of the word. They have no kingdom. Well, what kind of king doesn't have a kingdom? No subjects, no land, no realm, no tax base. The word used in Revelation as kings is basileus, which is to walk in power, or with the notion of having a foundation of power. The definition has several different definitions that you can use. 1, leader of the people. Prince, commander, lord of the land, and king. The definition chosen by the interpreters of the King James Bible chose kings. And then the scripture comes on to tell us that they have no kingdom. So they're kingdomless kings. So our options are really leader of the people. Well, again, there are no people. They have no kingdom. Prince. Again, I believe a prince requires people to be a prince, as an example would be the Prince of Wales. He is the prince of the people of Wales. How about lord of the land? Well, there again, you have a land, you have a kingdom. But they don't have a kingdom. Finally, commanders. Commanders, or generals, need not be in charge of the people, civilians, or be the head of a government. They command military assets, and they use them to accomplish military goals. This definition is precisely what is described in Revelation 17. They, the 10 commanders, give their power and authority and strength, I believe that's assets, unto the beast, the Assyrian, to make war, it says, with the Lamb, and to burn Babylon with fire. This authority and power is military. I am going to, from this point forward, refer to them only not as kings, but only as generals. This is in the same way that Alexander the Great's empire was divided by 4 horns. and they turned out to be 4 generals. But when we look for a 10-nation alliance, and if you've been doing that, you will be disappointed. Because I believe that they're not nations as such. They won't be all from Western Europe, certainly. One from the old Roman Empire, just from Europe, but they will represent both legs of the empire. They will have 5 generals, commanders, representing the Eastern, 5 the Western. Some scholars believe that the European Union will be the 10 toes. It'll take some transformation, they acknowledge that, mainly the expansion of the membership into the Middle East so that they can be from the Eastern Empire. I have given this view serious consideration, but I find it very unlikely. I agree with some that Europe's disposition would allow them to move towards this position. But I believe that the EU is an economic union, not a military institution. Its primary goal is to strengthen Europe's economic clout and position in the world, not to bring in some economically weak nations from the Middle East. The EU currently seems to be having trouble just accepting Turkey as a member of the EU. Turkey, of course, is outside of Europe. It's in Asia. If we ask the question, where is the military power in Europe currently concentrated? I say concentrated because this is a military alliance, going to have many nations, not just 1 or 2. The obvious answer is NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There has to be some major hurdles to overcome before NATO could take on the form of the 10 toes. They are as follows. 1, America is the primary member and controls most of the assets of NATO. It seems unlikely that America would destroy or burn America, which is what the scriptures seem to indicate. 2, NATO's primary focus was to defend Europe from attack from the Eastern Europeans and Russia, the Warsaw Pact nations. 3, NATO is a defensive entity, not offensive, as shown in Scripture. This particular group will go out and just start stomping people and tearing things up and is angry. Item 4, NATO is us. I say us, I'm an American. NATO has been the good guys fighting communism and such, and it's always done a great job. Item 5, why would NATO want to move into the Middle East? I will need to speak to all of these concerns coming in now. First, the fact that America presides over NATO is a given. Yes, we do. But the order given in Revelation 17 also shows that America, Mega Babylon, is presiding over the top of the 10 horns. So the position isn't out of whack. The position of America presiding over the 10 horns or sitting upon them appears to be right. They hate her for it. They find someone who will help them in destroying her, and they take advantage of it. There's currently a movement within NATO to separate America from NATO, to give NATO a completely European identity. Now, they call that the EI, the European identity. This move is supported by both Europeans and Americans. And they've had studies, NATO has made studies, that to see how this could be done, how it be made to happen. But while the Europeans want their autonomy, and they don't want to pay for it, it seems they've gotten used to America paying most of the bills, and providing the assets. And that's quite a change they would have to do. But their frustration level is very, very high. They resent America sticking its policies and its values into European affairs and the things that Europeans want to do, how Europeans see things. Then, on America's part, we're hesitating to give up the clout that America has through NATO to Europe. After all, America has interests in the area too. Why should America now fund Europe's defense and place our troops under European control? Because if they were to remain there, they would be. Their military economic recovery from World War II is complete. Why should we be doing that? However, America does want to reduce or end its financial obligations. It's very attractive economically. I think I need to tell the story and history and the situation of NATO at this point in order so you can really get a good feel for NATO. NATO was formed in 1949 to, in prophecy terms, protect the lion from the bear, England from Russia. And after World War II, the Soviet Union was threatening to attack into Western Europe. And no one nation in Europe could stop Russia from doing so. The Western European nations were in desperate need of rebuilding and a general recovery. The United States and Canada were two nations that came out of the war stronger and healthier than before. A lack of cohesive military alliances before the war was one of the reasons Hitler was so territorially successful. The NATO alliance was born from this post-war situation. There's nothing sinister in NATO's formation or its operations. While it's not always been smooth, the alliance overall has performed its mandate of protecting Western Europe with the wealth and military commitment of the United States. NATO has done this very, very well. NATO has had a well-defined and well-executed defensive plan. NATO began with 12 members: Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, the United Kingdom, Canada, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and the United States. These 12 members agreed that an attack on any one of them would be an attack on all. This doctrine is intact today and has only been exercised once in the alliance history, and that being the attack on the Twin Towers in New York City in 2001. In 1952, Greece and Turkey joined the alliance, followed in 1955 by West Germany. It was the addition of these powers, these nations, that prompted the Soviet Union to form the Warsaw Pact alliance. NATO versus Warsaw Pact created the front line of what was called the Cold War. In 1982, Spain also became a member of NATO. Now, with the breakup of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact in the 1990s, many Eastern European and Balkan nations were accepted as member states, bringing the total in NATO to 28 members total. The breakup of the Warsaw Pact created a real problem also for NATO. Their mandate was now in question. They have fulfilled their role. Or is there still something yet for NATO to do? Their role was to protect themselves from the members that they now have. What happens next is a real eye-opener. NATO begins a program which is called NATO Transformation. They began to totally redesign NATO's internal structure. They would keep the existing command structure in place and operating until the new NATO command was ready and tested. Then they would transfer to the new. However, many of the new doctrines of the new system have been implemented ahead of the overall transformation. The biggest change, or at least in my opinion, the biggest change, is the fact that it is not a purely defensive alliance anymore, but an offensive one. They are now designing for what they call, in NATO, out-of-theater operations, which means they can go anywhere they want to in the world. They can go outside of Europe and outside of Eastern Europe. They also have now a full-time standing army. That's theirs. It's called the International Security Assistance Force, and it functions. It's called the ISAF. This force is currently fighting in Afghanistan and is clearly outside of theater or Europe. They also have their own navy. They also continue to be a nuclear power, of course, both through Britain and France. Britain will continue to be a part of this alliance. Another major change is the inclusion of Russia into the NATO family of partners. Now, this is who they were designed to protect themselves against. NATO's partnership is often an intermediate step to full membership. But Russia's partnership that they have is more than any of the other nations. It's called the NATO-Russia Council, and it started in 2002. It was declared at the time of the opening of this council, the unthinkable has become reality. What a chilling thought. The bear is now a part of NATO. The Russians believe it will take a unified effort by the alliance that they're now a part of to defeat Islamic terrorism. They want to fight terrorism, and they need help, and we need help fighting militant Islam. And they want to assist. Essentially, they believe they have a common enemy, which is greater than their current dislike of the West. Therefore, they join. The Russians have stated that they expect to join the alliance at some point in the future, full membership. But, they say, it will probably be called something different, something else, not NATO. Something like the Atlantic-Pacific Alliance. To just go from the Atlantic coast of Europe to the Pacific. Seems clear they'd like to replace America within the alliance in the future. There'd be no need for America, would there? There are other nations which have been approached by NATO as well to engage in dialogue with NATO for partnership and for membership. One of these groups is called the Mediterranean Dialogue Nations. They include Algeria, Egypt, Jordan, Mauritania, Morocco, and Israel, and a group called the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative Nations, another group from the Middle East, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates. NATO's desire to extend its influence is nearly global. There is no power or alliance on earth that can contend with NATO. I heard one of its ministers the other day say, "Oh, we're not that powerful. There are places we can't go." An amazing fact about NATO is found in looking at a map of NATO, its members and its partners and the people that it's talking to, and it replaces the Roman Empire, the old Roman Empire, almost exactly. with only a few exceptions: Libya, Iraq, and Syria. Read the newspapers. Let's talk about where things are changing today. Libya, Iraq, Syria. Recently, NATO was instrumental in the fall of the Libyan government. NATO is also training the police departments and the police officers in Iraq. And, of course, NATO is threatening to attack the Assad government in Syria as a humanitarian move to protect the Syrian people from their government. Security. Now, I need to stop here. I want to close this session at this point, but the next session I want to cover more details about NATO and their current activities, their structure, and the amazing development in NATO, that command structure. Thank you.
This was only one session of many. Be sure to continue watching the Prophecy Project series. If you would like to read more information on this subject, you can find Alan's books on Amazon.com.